Hello, everyone, and welcome to Education in Focus, powered by Chalkboard News. I'm Dan McCaleb, Vice President of News and Content at the Franklin News Foundation, publisher of chalkboardnews.com. Chalkboard is a news website dedicated to issues related to K through 12 education. Joining me again today is Brendan Clary, Chalkboard's K through 12 editor. How are you, Brendan?
I'm doing all right, Dan. Trying to stay warm here. How about you?
Same thing there, Brendan. Hey, we are recording this on Monday, November 20th. Brendan, it's Thanksgiving week. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Looking forward to some sides, different green bean casserole, that kind of thing.
Oh, I was going to ask, what's your favorite Thanksgiving Day side?
I like them all. I mostly like pie, though. That's my thing, is the pie the next morning with coffee. That's where it's at.
Oh, the leftovers are definitely sometimes even better than the first day of the meal.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, Brendan, a new Gallup poll of parents of K through 12 students found that while most parents think their child is on the right track academically, and I'm quoting straight from your story here from chalkboardnews.com, most parents think their child is on the right track academically based on their grades. Test scores show the majority of students are not actually performing at grade level. The poll found that almost 80% of parents said their students received at least B grades, but that is contradicted by other data that shows that fewer than 50% of students meet standardized test scores that show grade level proficiency. Brendan, what does this mean? Are parents misinformed?
Yeah, I think it's a big question, Dan. And basically, yeah, what you're pointing to and what the Gallup poll and it's also a foundation called Learning Heroes, what that kind of points to, I think, is that there is sort of a discrepancy there between, how students are doing, maybe even based on their grades. That might be like the wider issue that, schools are, saying students are doing well academically, but it's based on maybe daily performance, right? Maybe they're doing like a quiz, or they're doing some kind of attendance-based sort of thing, like maybe like a participation sort of grade, and that can help show they're doing pretty well in their class. But on these test scores, which the analysis from Gallup and Learning Heroes found was that, on the whole, most of the students in this country are not hitting these benchmarks for different tests that show, how successful are you going to be in college, that have good predictors of success after you graduate from high school, right? And so there is sort of this disparity there. And exactly what you're asking is like, that's sort of the broader issue. And then a smaller, more, family-based level is if your student is getting mostly Bs, but maybe they're getting like Cs on what's really important, like a couple of big exams or like a big paper or something like that, then what does that mean overall? So I guess like there might be also maybe like more of a smaller disparity. Maybe a B- can mean a lot of different things in terms of like how students are progressing academically, right? And so that's sort of the problem. And it's sort of a separate problem is that there's a thing called gradeflation, right? Does a B not mean what it used to? And that is a concern that, I think that this report brings up is if students are behind academically at this nationwide level, and it seems like they're doing okay to their parents, then they're not going to be concerned. And so that's something else that was flagged in this report and this analysis of the polling data, is that parents are very concerned when this is flagged for them. When they find out, hey, my student is behind grade level, they're very concerned and they want to do everything that they can. So it's not like parents are out of the loop, but I think sometimes it can be hard to understand and complicating this. And this is something that we've written about at Chalkboard as well, is that there's sometimes different grading scales now than there used to be. So some have, a 1 to 5 proficiency scale, and that's very different than, A, B, C, D, and F that, maybe we were used to. And so that can be something that sort of, makes it even more confusing, can make it more difficult for parents to navigate, even ones who are very invested in their children's success.
Brendan, does any of the data here, does it get into the effects or the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and school closures? You and I have talked a lot about, learning loss suffered during that time. Does the pandemic, did it worsen, for example, this disconnect between what parents think their child is doing or how well their child is doing versus how well their child is actually doing? Does that have anything to do with it?
It might because of, basically school districts and schools across the country at that time, they said, we're going to let students graduate. We're not going to punish them. And I've talked to researchers who said this very thing. They said, we're not going to punish students for a global pandemic that's outside of our control and outside of their control. Like, it's not fair that they're not able to graduate. because they're not receiving the level of instruction that they were before the pandemic, right? And so they had to lower the standards. And I talked to one researcher this summer who said he called it COVID credentials, and that's something that we've talked before about, Dan. And so I think that might be going into play here, is that students are getting a B in class, but they're not getting a B on the same material that they would have 2 years ago, if they're the COVID cohort, so that they're getting a different quality of education. So that means something different.
Is that sort of like a post-COVID versus pre-COVID, like bell curve?
Well, it might be. I think that data is still kind of coming, right? Because we're sort of just now seeing the freshman class, 2019, 2020, they were the first, high school students. Like, we're starting to get that test score data back. And that's, what we found at the ACT scores earlier this year that came out, that there was the 6th year of decline in a row. And so it's still very, very negative. So it might be that we're starting to see some of that sort of go back up, and that, there are more of these rigorous standards, and that's going to have less of an impact, right, as we go on. But that data is not quite in yet. So I think it's kind of hard to say how that's going to play out. So yeah, that's a good question.
And your reporting on this survey, it shows that there's some discrepancies among minority groups too. Some are affected more than others.
Right. Yeah, that NAAP data, it's called the Nation's Report Card. It found that only 17% of Black students and 21% of Hispanic students are proficient in reading. This did not affect everybody, the same way. It also found that 85% of Black and Hispanic parents are saying that their child is at or above grade level in either reading or math. So that points to your earlier question there of there is maybe this disparity between what parents think, where they think their child is, and then what the test data shows. And that's kind of the concerning part here, right? Is that the polling is finding that, these parents are saying, hey, my kid is at reading level. But then you have this test data showing, that's not the case, right? That they're very far behind where they should be, and maybe where they were before the pandemic. I'd have to look into that, because I'm not exactly sure if that was like the bell curve that we were talking about, but essentially that there is this disconnect there, and that I think that points to a lot of different kinds of factors around COVID, but also maybe just like communicating with parents. And that was something that was very clear in the report, is parents, if your student has a B, parents should go to teachers and say, where is my student? How can I help them? What are other metrics that I can use to understand and gauge where they are? Are they reading at grade level? Are they, getting everything that they need to in order to succeed in this? And maybe trying to look for some of those different kinds of benchmarks and different kinds of metrics to really help their student and help kind of communicate with teachers. And that's on parents to be invested in their children's success, right? And that's what the report was finding.
So even if your child brings home mostly B's, parents still need to get involved in their children's education, communicate with their children's teachers and administrators. Thank you, Brendan, for your insight into this, but that's all the time we have. Listeners can keep up with this story and all stories related to K-12 education at chalkboardnews.com. For Brendan Clary, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.